Hey guys, I hope you're all doing really well. I'm really excited for today's video. We are going to be talking about my favorite and my least favorite shades in 8 of my eyeshadow palettes. And this video is actually in collaboration with my friend Tosh. If you guys haven't yet found her channel, I highly suggest that you go and check her out. I will have her linked in the cards as well as in the description box. But her channel is just this perfect blend between creative and analytical, and I mean that in the sense of the types of video that she does, and her looks that she creates, and the way that she looks at makeup in general, not just through a panner's perspective or a makeup use-up perspective, but just like as an everyday consumer as well. And yeah, her videos are super inspiring, and her videos are very unique, the concepts behind them, and I highly suggest that you guys go check her out. So yes, of course, everything will be linked down below. And this video concept was actually started as a collaboration between Georgia Harris and I believe her name's Lacey. Yeah, her channel is Spooky Lips and Fat Hips, and they did their favorite shades in palettes. But I've seen so many people do a twist where they talk about their least favorite shades as well, and that just looked like so much fun. So we are going to be doing that today. Tosh is also going to be talking about 8 palettes from her collection, and I want to show you guys like a color scheme of like my favorites and then my least favorites as well, because I've seen some people do that, and the palettes look so cool. The color schemes look so cool, and they really tell a story about someone's personal preference. So we're going to be doing that as well. But yeah, let's just hop right into the video. First palette I want to talk about is this guy right here. This is the Colourpop Yes Please palette, and my favorite shade in this palette is something that I think is maybe one of the more boring shades, but it is absolutely beautiful, and it's this shade right here called GNO. This shade is just like a perfect terracotta kind of shade with a little bit more brown in it, and I love this shade all over the lid as a one and done kind of eyeshadow look, or I love it to deepen up and warm up any sort of eyeshadow look. It's so, so beautiful. And my least favorite shade in this palette is this guy right here. I'm actually wearing this on my lids today, just in the center of the halo, and this is the shade called Chauffeur. This is the first time I'm wearing this shadow though. I have never been drawn to try it out, but I figured I would give it a shot today, and I think this is probably the only way that I can wear this shadow is as the center of a halo eye, so that's why I've just never had any interest in using this shade. It just doesn't intrigue me either, this yellow, orange, gold kind of tone. Not my thing. I do love oranges, I love golds, and I love yellows, but something about this, it's not my favorite. Next up, I want to talk about one of my absolute favorite palettes. This guy is the Urban Decay Electric palette, and I am so happy with the way that most of these shades perform, and it's so hard to pick a favorite, but there is one shade in here that I find myself reaching for most often, and I think that's a pretty good indicator of what is my favorite. And the shade I reach for all the time is this guy right here called Jilted. I love it because it's such a dynamic tone. It's unlike anything else that I have in my collection, and it just transforms depending on what you use it with. So if I have a hot pink in my crease, it looks much more pink, but if I pair it with more of like a deep plum purple, then it looks more purple, and it goes so well with blues and like more iridescent kind of shades. It's a really, really fun color. My least favorite shade, however, in this palette, I find it just doesn't have much variety, and I find that's usually why I tend to not like shades, I suppose. And it's this one right here. This is the shade Revolt, and it just doesn't offer anything special to me because I am not drawn to silver tones, and then this one also is just literally like flecks of silver. It doesn't even have much of a base pigment in my opinion, and I just find like it could have been left out of this palette. Like there could have been a nice bright yellow, there could have been anything else, to be completely honest, like a nice aqua or mint, or I don't know, a forest green. Like there's so many other shades that could have been in this palette, and this one is just, it just doesn't make sense to me. This guy right here is the ABH Modern Renaissance palette, another really beautiful warm tone palette, and there are a couple shades in here that I definitely do enjoy, but I wouldn't actually look at this palette and be immediately drawn to any specific shades except for one, and it's not really a warm tone shade at all. My favorite shade in this palette I would consider to be Antique Bronze, and that is more of like a neutral sort of tone. It's really difficult for me to describe because sometimes it comes off quite rosy, other times it comes off very smoky, and I find that I'm really drawn to it because it's a kind of shade that I can pair with a variety of different tonal looks, as well as I can wear it on its own. It's so nice to buff it into the crease and wear it just as a single shadow look. It looks absolutely beautiful, and I find it really does bring out the green in my eyes. So I think that's my favorite shade in this palette. And then my least favorite shade in this palette is like the polar opposite. It does nothing for me. It's something that I just don't find myself ever reaching for, and it's the shade right here called Golden Ochre. This is such a boring shade in the pan. It's like a taupey beige shade. And then when I swatch it, all of a sudden it seems like it has not silver, but just like specks of shimmer in it. It's so strange. I guess the way it meshes with the oils in my fingers or something, it just no longer is a flat color, and then it basically buffs away to nothing. It's so similar to my skin tone. It's very bizarre, and it's kind of like not a dud in this palette, but it's definitely something that doesn't add anything to this palette. I'll just say that. I have got another ABH palette right here. This is the Subculture palette, which is very controversial, but this is a very inspiring palette to me personally because of the color scheme and the depth of all of the shades. I just love this palette actually quite a lot, and I know that that is an unpopular opinion, but I really do like this palette. So it was really difficult for me to pick my favorite shade, but when I look at the palette in terms of its performance and the colors, my favorite shade in this palette is this shade right here called Edge, and I think that's what I actually want Golden Ochre in the Modern Renaissance to be. It's this gorgeous mustard shade that also adds warmth to so many different looks, but it can be worn on its own, and it's just a really cool shade, and I find that it blends out amazingly. When I look at this palette, there's so many other shades that I think I would say my eye is drawn to first, but in terms of performance, they just don't have it. This one really kills it with its performance, and yeah, I really, really like it. I love mustards. I think that they're just so fun and edgy, but still like very simple. I really like mustards. And that one's a great one. And then my least favorite shade in this palette, it just doesn't do anything. This is the shade Cube right here. I find that every single time I use this palette, that shade just like seals over almost, and it's so hard to pick up any sort of pigment. I understand the concept behind it, and I would love to see a different brand execute it. Like, the idea of this in a Super Shock shadow would be so cool, or like a liquid shadow would be so cool because it offers that iridescent top coat almost that you can put over top of any powder shadow, giving you a little bit of a pinky, purple, blue, almost silver kind of reflect, but with a lot of iridescence to it. And this just doesn't do that. This just disappears, and it's impossible to pick up with a brush. You have to use your finger, and you can't put down any pigmentation because it just sticks to the oils in my finger. And yeah, it's just really unfortunate, really. This guy is the Juvia's Place Masquerade Mini palette, and this is such a beautiful, versatile palette. There's so many colors that my eye is drawn to because of the bright, colorful shades and then the like more neutral, warm tones. It's so hard to pick an absolute favorite, but the first shade I ever used from this palette still is the one that I personally think performs the absolute best. And I've used all of these shades multiple times now because I've been focusing on this palette this past month. And the first shade I ever used was this guy right here called Makita, which is just a true purple, but it's a metallic finish, and damn, it is so good. It's so pigmented, and the shade is spot on. The formula is spot on as well, and I can't say that honestly for all of the shimmers in this palette. It doesn't need a glitter glue, it doesn't need anything. It just goes on with intense pigmentation, whereas I find a lot of the other shimmer shades in here, they require a lot more building up or a glitter glue. And yeah, this one just doesn't need anything like that. My least favorite shade in this palette is also one of the colorful shades, and it was really disappointing. I hadn't realized that the shade Bori right here had pink flecks of glitter in it. Why do they have gold flecks of glitter in here? It's so unfortunate because it is just a true matte pink, hot pink, and it could be a really cool color, but it isn't. And not only are there gold flecks in there, but actually this shadow does not perform as I wish it would. It is so dry. It feels so hard in the pan to the touch. It does not feel nice at all when you swatch it, and when you try to pick it up with a brush, it's the same situation. You have to dig quite a lot, and it just doesn't blend. It doesn't give me enough oomph when I use it. I would much rather reach for my electric palette for a hot pink. It's just a very disappointing shade. Next up, I want to talk about the Colourpop and Kathleen Lights Dream Street palette. This is a beautiful neutrals with a couple pops of color palette, but I love the color selection in this palette because it's really out of the norm. It's a little bit more of an unpredictable color scheme, and I really love that. My favorite shade has to be one of the brights, and it is this shade right here called Spark. I love this shade so much. Again, it's the kind of color I can wear all over the lid and buff it into the crease and wear it on the lower lash line, and it just be a single color look for a really edgy kind of look, but it also can warm up a variety of shades, put a shimmer on the lid, or really whatever. Like, it is so versatile, and I just love it because it's not a true red. It does have an element of orange or pink in there. There's something that just makes it a little bit more special, even though it is a matte red. I love it. I'm really drawn to that shade. It was the first shade I ever wore from this palette, and it's the shade that I reach for the most often when I use this palette for sure. Whereas my least favorite shade, although it swatches very well, when it comes to using it on the eyes, I find it doesn't perform very well, and it's the shade called Sweet Dreams right here. It's just a gold shade, but it's the same kind of thing as Revolt from the Urban Decay Electric palette, where it doesn't have any sort of base pigment. It mostly is just chunks of glitter. It's just the kind of shade that I find I have to work really hard for, and I don't even love the way it looks even once I've worked really hard. So again, just a shade that was a little bit disappointing. Honestly, when it comes to this specific palette from Colourpop, I don't know what it is, but I don't love the metallics in here at all. I find that they all are kind of sparse like that, and I want a metallic shade to be like super intense, to have a lot of base pigment so I don't have to build it up. Like, that's my personal preference when it comes to shimmery metallics, and this palette just doesn't really do it for me. But that one performs the worst in my opinion. This is the NYX Ultimate Frights palette, and as a whole, I'm not really in love with this palette, but there is one shade that I discovered during my 1 month 2 palettes with this palette that I fell absolutely in love with, and is definitely my favorite shade within this palette. It's this pink shade right here. It's a bit of a dusty, mid-toned pink, almost like a blushy sort of tone, but there's something so dynamic about it on the eyes. I don't have a pink quite like this. I have more peachy pinks and I have more hot pinks, but there's something really special about this guy, and I know that it seems like a boring pick out of this entire palette, but the rest of the shades, as much as they look beautiful in the pan, they just don't seem to perform the way that I had hoped from them. And then my least favorite shade in this palette is this guy right here. It's this blue that has a slight shimmer or sheen to it, but honestly, when you swatch it and when you try to apply it on the eyes, it's so dusty, so patchy, and it's just so unfortunate, really. And a lot of the blues in this palette actually, I would say, perform very similarly to that. It's really disappointing. And the last palette I want to share is this guy right here. This is the Too Faced Chocolate Bar palette, which is a mostly neutrals palette. So when I look at this palette, it honestly doesn't really inspire me. But there is one shade in this palette that every time I've worn it, I find it to be so interesting and so special, even though in the pan, it doesn't really look like much at all. And it's the shade right here called Creme Brulee. It's this like dirty gold kind of shade. It's almost like a bronze, almost a gold. It's something really quite unique when it comes to metallic neutrals, and on my eyes it looks really cool. I find it really brings out the green in my eyes, and it just goes so well with my coloring. It has a little bit of a grungy feel, but also a glam feel. It is very unique and very special. That shade definitely is very unique and valuable to my collection because I don't own anything quite like that one. And the shade that actually really drew me into this palette is actually my least favorite shade in this palette. It is this one right here called Cherry Cordial, which looks like a deep maroon or burgundy kind of shade, but when I put it on my eyes, it just looks like a chocolate brown, and that's really disappointing because I thought it would be so fun to have more of a rich, like fall-toned burgundy. I thought that would be so cool, and that shade just doesn't do it for me. It even has like small little pink toned glitter or like small shimmer in it, and that picks up actually quite a lot on my brush, and so we can't use this color as a matte, even though in the pan it kind of looks like it is a matte. So it's just, again, a really disappointing shade in terms of performance and color and texture. So this right here is the shades that I selected as my favorites in each of the palettes, and honestly, I am in love with this color scheme. A mix of warms, a mix of cools, mattes, and shimmers. It's really interesting. I think that makes such a fun color palette, and it's honestly not what I would have expected from myself. I've always loved greens and oranges when it comes to eyeshadows, but this palette tells me otherwise, and I think that's so cool. This color scheme, on the other hand, is all of my least favorite shades. You can kind of tell why they might be my least favorite shades. In terms of performance, they don't really have anything special. All the mattes that are here are pretty dry and chalky and kind of patchy looking. And then the shimmers, they just don't seem to have as much impact as something that I would really gravitate towards. I'm so excited to watch Tasha's video because I feel like she's going to pick orange and purple and browns, because those are the colors I definitely see her wearing most often and gravitating towards most often as well. And please keep in mind, actually, I just realized this, that if any of these shades that I've mentioned as my least favorite shade are one of your favorite shades in the palettes, please don't be offended by that. It's all a matter of personal preference, my personal style, my own experience with the palettes. So please keep that in mind. Please don't be upset by that. But let me know if you guys would have made any similar choices to me or different choices to me. I love to hear everyone's makeup opinions, and that's absolutely everything for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching and hanging out with me. This was so much fun. Just so much fun to just sit down with my makeup and swatch and play, and it just be fun. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.